Hi, everybody. It is so good to be back. I have missed everybody. I hope you guys have had a great beginning of October and the official spooky season. I know we've been extremely busy, very creative here in the crypt as always. So I'm going to give everybody a little bit of time to get in, get settled. Let us know you're here. Say hello if you're new here at PBDC TV or especially here in the crypt with Mother De La Morte. Let us know where you're from. We always like to have new victims here in the crypt. So tonight's going to be a fun one. I always like to have fun with these. It is more in line with kind of the classic um, spooky stories and tales and things like that. I know I normally do more obscure stuff, but this is more in like the mainstream. And maybe for some of you guys, it's not. Maybe this is something new that you haven't heard of. For one thing, though, that I can say on this particular topic is that it goes a lot deeper than what it appears to be on the surface. And that's the reason I find this particular topic tonight to be right in line with what we normally talk about here on the Horror Gallery. You see, we've renamed it, kind of tweaked some stuff, got a new intro. So super excited about that. Been working on that. So let's see what's going on here in the chats, and I will try not to put my finger in anybody's face. Let's see what we've got going on. So we have Frank here. Hi, Frank. Hi, Lewis. Hi, Mike. Hi, Raven. Hi, Kisa. I hope everybody is having a fantastic week so far. Let's see. Hi, Zool. How are you? And Liz. Hi, Liz. How are you? I'm so glad you guys are here. So, yes, we're going to be talking about Resurrection Mary. And like I said, it's something most people have heard. You may not know all of the story, possibly, but it does run a lot deeper and more in depth than a lot of people realize. And that's what I find this particular topic so interesting. Now, before we get started, we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of house cleaning. Again, Facebook is continually becoming more aggressive with their reach. And when it comes to pages and channels that have a good, healthy, organic following that really messes with their algorithms, they'd rather you pay to play than to get those organic likes. So the absolute very best thing that you can do to not only show your support for us here at PBDC TV, but for the independent artists, is to share to people that you think might be interested in our content. All of our content creators and artists work really, really hard to bring everybody, fun and interesting content to watch. Let's see, like and share. If you have not liked our YouTube, and especially I think we kind of learned a little something or were reminded about a little something the other day when Facebook went down. I know Facebook has gotten in the habit of blocking a lot of people too, or shadow banning them. I know we've got a couple of viewers and followers and supporters that have been having problems with that. You can always catch us on YouTube. Okay, we go live on YouTube just like we go live here, as well as many times, especially if it is content that might be in conflict with social media community standards. We will stream those directly to our website as well. So you can always catch us there. Let's see, we do have a watch page. So if you prefer to stay off YouTube, but you would like to see some of the past shows of things that we offer, all of our content artists that participate in this program do have a player up on our watch page, so you can catch all of their back streams and things like that. We also have some limited spaces for sponsorship. If you are a business group or have a product and you're looking to advertise, like I said, we do have limited sponsorship spaces available. You can reach us here through Facebook or through our website for more information. Also, don't forget about Eating Sundays. So let's see what's going on in the comments real quick, and then we'll go through our legal mumbo jumbo and we'll get started because it looks like we've got a lot of conversation going. Hi, Andy. How are you? Good to have you here. Hi, Susan. Okay, so I think I've got everybody covered and greeted and said hello to. All right, so if we want to go ahead and put up our legal stuff. So under the fair use, another author may make limited use of the original author's work without asking permission. Pursuant to Section 17 U.S. Code 107, certain uses of copyright material for the purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, including multiple copies for classroom use, scholarships, or research, is not an infringement of copyright. So we like to kind of get that out of the way. All right, so tonight, for people that are just joining us, we're going to be doing part one of Resurrection Mary. And we're going to get into kind of, what Resurrection Mary is, who she might be, and kind of, the ghost stories that go along with this. But let's go ahead and kind of set the mood first. We're going to be going back to 1939. Okay, the year was 1939. Now, during this particular time in history, we also saw Germany and the Soviet Union attack Poland and Britain, France, India, and Australia, as well as New Zealand, or New Zealand, I should say. They also declared war on Germany on September 3rd. The United States decided to remain neutral, but did begin to rearm for war, which helped end the Great Depression. The United States also hosted the World's Fair in New York earlier in the year. Also, after speaking to the physicist Albert Einstein, President Roosevelt initiated the America's A-bomb program. Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz with Judy Garland premieres on the silver screen. Lou Gehrig retires from Major League Baseball. And in Chicago, which is where this takes place, gang violence was still running rampant in the streets. And at a local Chicago dance hall, the Liberty Grove Hall and Ballroom at 74th and Mozart, a gentleman by the name of Jerry Fallis was out for the night on the town, where Jerry was a regular. When he suddenly became captivated by a young blonde woman and immediately asked her to dance. He learned little about her except that her name was Mary, and she lived on South Damon Avenue on the south side of town. He danced with the young woman all night, and when it was time to leave, Jerry, being a gentleman, offered Mary a ride home. Before his death in 1992, Jerry was interviewed about his encounter with Resurrection Mary. He described the events of that evening, and I quote, "As we walked along the streets, she says, 'Well, you might as well take me down to Archer Road.' And I said, 'What for?' I said, 'You live up here where you told me.' And she says, 'No, I want to go out to Archer Road.' Knowing that it was in the opposite direction of where she said she lived, he graciously said okay and took her anyway. As they're traveling down Archer Road, Jerry noticed the young woman seemed very anxious and signals to the young man to drop her off. Jerry hesitates because it is late and there doesn't seem to be any residences nearby. The only thing he knows in this area is the local cemetery, Resurrection Cemetery. But because she is so persistent and agitated, he reluctantly pulls over. The young woman jumps from the car and runs towards the locked gates of the cemetery, where she seems to pass through easily and then promptly disappears. He doesn't remember that the young lady had written her, or he does, remember that the young lady had written her address down on a napkin, and later the next day, he proceeds to the address to ensure that his date made it home safely, only to be met with an older woman. Now, he asked the woman and explained to her what had happened and that he had met the girl and that the girl, had lived there. Well, at first the woman was very perplexed and she was like, "No, there's no young woman that lives here." When Jerry happened to see behind the lady's shoulder a picture on the table, and he pointed at it and he said, "That's her." That's when the woman informed him that that was her daughter, who had died some years ago after being the victim of a hit and run coming home from a night of dancing. Jerry noticed, like I said, the photograph on the coffee table. And then it dawned on Jerry that Mary was no ordinary woman. And I quote, "It's then," Jerry said, "that he understood why the woman he was dancing with that night was ice cold to the touch. He had worked in a funeral home for a while, and it was the touch of a corpse. Jerry Fallis had unknowingly met what would come to be known as Chicago's most famous ghost, Resurrection Mary." And now I got some of that information from unsolved.com, but let's see what is going on in the comments real quick. Yeah, Fallis, Jerry Fallis. Hi, Jenny. How are you? All right. Let's see. Okay. All right. Now, Resurrection Mary is a well-known Chicago area ghost story of the vanishing hitchhiker type. It's a type of folklore, or in some cases considered urban legend, that is known from many cultures. One of the earliest written examples of this type of story can actually, be found in the Christian Bible in Luke chapter 24, verse 13 through 32. It also represents the classic lady in white folklore. Now, I know we have talked about this in the past, but to kind of just give you an idea of kind of where I stand on things, and where quite a few people kind of in our line of interest seem to agree, is that the difference between folklore and urban legend is often, not always, but often urban legend, they really can't find a basis to where it started. It's kind of like, well, I have a cousin whose hairdresser's sister said, or I heard from an old classmate's cousin's brother's sister who said, and there's very little evidence to actually show where a particular story may have come from. Now, folklore, in comparison, a lot of times can be based on a true event. Yes, it can be ambiguous, it can be obscure, but there's usually some sort of grain of truth to folkloric tales. Now, the case of Resurrection Mary, I do believe, based on my information and my research, she falls more in line with folklore. And we're going to get into that. Now, where were we at? So we're talking about urban legends. So urban legends, it's based outside. So the urban legend, or folklore, I should say, is based outside of Resurrection Cemetery in Justice, Illinois, just a few miles southwest of Chicago. Now, this young apparition has been appearing along Archer Avenue and in the area's most hopping dance halls since the 1930s. Dozens of people have reported seeing her, and all of the stories seem to have a similar theme. Now, Richard Crowe, who was a local historian and folklorist, stated, and I quote, "I think of all the ghost stories worth believing in, Resurrection Mary is the one with the best documentation. The witnesses that I've found are remarkably level-headed, and they're primarily blue-collar, middle-class types who have steady jobs and who have no other major claims to psychic encounters in their lives. Now, since the 1930s, several men driving northeast along Archer Avenue between Willowbrook Ballroom and Resurrection Cemetery have reported picking up a young female hitchhiker. And the thing about Resurrection Mary, now it doesn't always happen this way, but about 98% of the time, she only shows herself to men or women that are in the company of men. So now that's not always the case, but that does seem to kind of be a running theme or thing with her. Now, this young woman is dressed somewhat formally in a white party dress and is said to have light blonde hair and blue eyes. There are other reports that say she wears a thin shawl, dancing shoes, and carries a small clutch purse, and possibly that she is very quiet. When the driver nears the Resurrection Cemetery, the young woman asks to be let out, whereupon she disappears into the cemetery. Now, in 1973, Resurrection Mary was said to have shown up at Harlow's nightclub on Cicero Avenue in Chicago's southwest side. And just to kind of explain a little bit about this area, this particular area, the Archer Road area, is there's a lot of immigrants, Polish immigrants, so it's a very close-knit community, and at this time was mostly Polish in origin as far as, you know, the immigrants that lived in this area. It was also along Archer Road and the surrounding areas, a lot of ballrooms and dance halls and different things like that, because you've got to remember about this time in history between the 1920s and the 1930s, like at this point, like Al Capone is in Alcatraz. You still have a lot of the old gangster types that are still around. A lot of them may be in jail at this point. But kind of the roaring 20s, you know, and 30s, that's all still going on. So dance halls were extremely popular. Now, when the driver nears the Resurrection Cemetery, like I said, the young woman asks to be let out, whereupon she disappears into the cemetery. Now, the same year in 1973, there was a cab driver who came into Chet's Melody Lounge across the street from Resurrection Cemetery to inquire about a young lady who had left without paying her fare. Now, this was later on. The area had kind of built up a little bit since the Jerry Fallis, you know, sighting. Now, several other men had reported giving a ride to a young woman in a white dress who instructed them to drive her down Archer and then disappeared when they got close to the cemetery. Now, let's talk about the cemetery gates a little bit because there's a whole bunch of like stories surrounding the gates themselves. Now, in 1976, a couple reported seeing a young girl who appeared to be locked inside the cemetery. On Tuesday night, August 10th, and this comes from ghostresearch.org as well as the Chicago Tribune. On Tuesday night, August 10th, 1976, the Justice Police Department received a phone call from a man who stated that he was driving past the cemetery gates when he apparently saw a girl locked in after hours. It was going on around 10:30 p.m. when a police officer responded to the call. Patrolman Pat Homa looked for the girl with his spotlight and then called out on his loudspeaker, but to no avail. However, in shining his flashlight around the gates, he discovered that two of the bars had been pulled apart. These were large brass bars. Embedded in the metal were the impressions of handprints. On the surface of the green patina of the bronze were scorch marks, and within that, what looked like skin texture as though someone had seared the marks into the bars. He related the story on paranormal television, the show That's Incredible. Some of you guys may remember that, and wound up losing his job over it. Now, the marks looked like they had been made by human hands, and crowds flocked to the main gates to gawk at the bars at Resurrection Cemetery that supposedly Resurrection Mary had bent. Now, in an effort to control kind of the crowd and the hubbub about it, the cemetery attempted to blowtorch the marks off what it had off, but it had the opposite effect. Now the bars were blackened and could easily be seen from Archer, and consequently, more people showed up than ever. Disgusted with the publicity and with Halloween approaching, the cemetery hacksawed the bars and installed a fine wire mesh for security reasons until the bars could be straightened and replaced. Now, of course, the cemetery denies this story emphatically. According to a cemetery worker, Chet Kowalski, as reported, like I said, by the Chicago Tribune article in October 25th of 1992, a front-end loader truck that backed into the gates while doing sewer work bent the bars. Now, according to, how did I say his name? Kowalkiewicz, the grounds worker tried to restore the bars to their original position by heating them with a blowtorch and bending them back. The imprint in the blackened metal, he said, was of a worker's glove. However, if it is true, then why haven't the marks reverted back to their green-colored state that is caused by the oxidation of the bronze when exposed to the elements? It has been over 20 years, and to this day, the area where the handprints were discovered is still a blackened area. Now, I will say, as of, I think, 2000 and something, they wound up just completely removing the bars altogether. Now, on August 12th of 1976, just 2 days after the bars were discovered, bent, a Cook County squad car investigated a CB radio emergency call about an apparent hit and run automobile victim, about an apparent hit and run. Now, the automobile victim arrived near the intersection of 76th and Street and Roberts Road. Now, when they came upon this, what they found was a girl in her 1965 Ford Mustang. Now, back in those days, everybody had CBs. Now, her CB microphone was still in her hand and she was in tears. They asked the girl where the body was that she had just reported on the side of the road. She pointed to an area that had a depression in the soft, wet grass that evening, which appeared to conform to the shape of a human body. The girl said that just as the squad car turned off 79th Street to come in her direction, the body on the side of the road disappeared from sight. And there have been also dozens of reports made by people who either had to slam on their brakes because a young girl in a white dress ran out in front of the car, or who have seen her walking down the middle of the road. There were said to be sightings in 1976, 1978, 1990, and 1989, which involved cars striking or nearly striking Mary outside Resurrection Cemetery. Mary disappears. However, by the time the motorist exits the car, she's just no longer there. Now, other reports also report that sometimes she'll just go right through the car, like just, like you see in the movies, you'll just go right through. But 9 times out of 10, she will disappear either before the car reaches her or before the driver can get out of the car. And sometimes the drivers have reported actually hearing a thump as if it actually did hit something solid, but there's never anything there. Now, let's see what's going on in the comments real quick, and then I think we're going to go to a short commercial break. Hi, Stephen. Stephen P. Kitty Cat. So Frank says, did they install a screen door on the gates like they used for their submarine? Actually, it was a little screened area that they put on there. Let's see. Okay, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, but Cyric PS, I know I butchered that. I'm very, very sorry. States Ghost Research Society has a lot of information on Mary, as does any of Richard Crow's sites. Yes, and we're going to get to Richard Crow. Well, we talked about him a little bit. He died several years ago and is buried. Yes, he is interred in Resurrection Cemetery. He absolutely is. Hi, Nadine. How are you? And then Cyric, and again, I apologize, states, I have investigated both Resurrection Cemetery and Chet's Melody Lounge across the street, but never saw Mary. Archer is one of the most haunted roads in the county, former Indian Trail. Yes, and we're going to get into the Archer Triangle or the Archer Avenue Triangle in part 2, because the land itself in that area is, I think, very unique. So I would absolutely agree with you. Absolutely unique. And you know, there's a lot, which I'm sure you know, there's a lot of buildings that are still, you know, in that area that have a lot of dark history, a lot of mob history, a lot of speakeasy history, a lot of different things, and secret tunnels and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, we're going to get into a lot of that, talking about Archer Avenue Triangle next week, but it is extremely interesting. Absolutely. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll go to a commercial break real quick, and then we'll get back to this.
This is Mikey from Out of the Ordinary, and you're watching PBDC TV.
Oh, hi! First thing in the morning, when I'm listening to music and getting a little bit of time for some creepy research, I'm always representing with my PBDC merch. What a better way to have a cup of coffee in the morning.
Don't forget to check out our other cool merch at rootsbleedred.com. That's rootsbleedred.com.
This is Professor Edgar Fluffosaurus from Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, and when I'm not hosting Monster Chat or knocking down small Japanese cities, I'm watching PBDC TV. Now back to the show.
And we're back. All right, so let's see where we're at. So we were kind of talking about how she's been cited and things like that, and talking about kind of the way there's a lot of different variations to this particular story. But like I said, in some of these, usually the best thing to do, or I've found the best thing to do, is to kind of get an overall consensus of what the main storyline is. And this tends to be more the main storyline. So that's what we've kind of gone over. As far as Resurrection Mary, the folklorish tale or myth is concerned. Now, another report was recorded by the Suburban Tribune columnist Bill Geist. He interviewed a cab driver in 1979 who claimed that he had picked up a young woman in a white party dress and matching shoes. As he drove her down Archer, she told him to stop the car. And again, when he did, of course, she disappeared. Now, on January 31st of 1979, the article in the Suburban Tribune by columnist Bill Geist detailed the story of that cab driver who was named Ralph, who picked up that young woman. And I quote from Ralph, "A looker, a blonde. She was young enough to be my daughter, 21 tops, near a small shopping center on Archer Avenue. A couple of miles up Archer there, she jumped with a start like a horse and said, 'Here, here, hit the brakes,' talking about, I guess, letting her out. I looked around and didn't see no kind of house. 'Where?' I said, and then she sticks out her arm and points across the road to my left and says, 'There.' That's when it happened. I looked to my left, like this, and at this little shack, and when I turned, she was gone, vanished, and the car door never opened. May the good Lord strike me dead, it never opened." Now, Geist described Ralph as not an idiot or maniac, but rather, in Ralph's own words, a typical 52-year-old working guy, veteran, father, Little League baseball coach, churchgoer, the whole sort. Geist went on to say, and I quote, "The simple explanation, Ralph, is that you picked up Chicago area's preeminent ghost, Resurrection Mary." Now, over the years, Resurrection Mary has been seen time and time again at dance clubs, in taxis, walking outside the cemetery, looking for someone to take her home. Now, in 1980, Claire Rudnick was driving along the front of Resurrection Cemetery when she too spotted Mary. And I quote, "I really didn't think there was any ghost. You hear these stories and these old ghost tales, but it never happened to me. But now I must say, I think I'm changing my mind. I was just looking out the window as we were going down the street, and on the right-hand side of the road, there was a girl walking. She was bright, very bright, like illuminated. She was just walking very slow. I remember thinking, oh my God, that's Resurrection Mary. And I can feel my stomach starting to turn. I was very frightened. I have to admit it did scare me." Now, Claire's husband, Mark Rudnick, was also in the car, and I quote, "We all went past it, turned around and came back, and by the time we had gotten back to where we'd originally seen her, it had gone and vanished." Now, another thing about this particular sighting by the Rudnicks is that in an interview, and I believe that it was on Unsolved Mysteries, if I'm not mistaken. He had an interview. Now, he did wind up saying that when he looked in his rearview mirror, and I'm just stating the information that I had found, that she had no face. It was just a void, no face. So I find that kind of ironic into some of the things we're going to get into here in just a minute, that she had no face. Now, in October of 1989, Janet Callall and a friend were out for an evening drive. After about an hour, they found themselves at Resurrection Cemetery. It was then, Janet recalled, that a pale young woman stepped in front of the car. And I quote, "There was no impact. There was no bump to say that I had hit something. But I know she ran out, and I know I hit her. She was all in white, and her hair and the dress were flowing back. It was like a stream backwards, away from her. And I just saw this profile of a young woman." Now, Resurrection Cemetery is the final resting place of more than 150,000 souls. And some researchers have attempted to link Resurrection Mary to one of the many thousands of burials in Resurrection Cemetery. Matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, Resurrection Cemetery is one of the largest cemeteries and mausoleum sites in the United States, or the continental United States, I believe. And so, and some, like I said, researchers have attempted to link Resurrection Mary to one of these many interned. So who was Resurrection Mary? Well, nobody is really sure other than her origin stories. Now, some think she was Mary Begovy, who died in 1934 by a car accident. Although the ghost has always been said to have shoulder-length blonde hair, and Mary Begovy had short, dark hair. Now, Mary Begovy had been killed in a traffic accident in 1934, a month before her 21st birthday. She was laid to rest in Resurrection Cemetery in her favorite white gown. Now, there are some people that deny that and say that she was actually buried in an orchid gown. So there's that. There's some of that does not match. And the fact that she does have dark hair. Now, the story, and I would say the origin story of this particular Mary, is the story goes that Mary had spent the evening dancing with a boyfriend at the O. Henry Ballroom. At some point, they got into an argument and Mary stomped out. She left the ballroom and started walking up Archer Avenue. She had not gotten very far when she was struck and killed by a hit-and-run driver who fled the scene, leaving Mary to die. Now, the story also goes on to say her parents were the ones that found her and were grief-stricken at the sight of her dead body. They buried her in Resurrection Cemetery wearing a beautiful white dancing dress and matching dancing shoes. The hit-and-run driver was never found. So that is the story of Mary Begovy. Now, and this information that I found is based on some information at haunteddetective.com. Now, the concept of the vanishing traveler, or some call the phantom hitchhiker, has been with us for at least 2,000 years. And though most vanishing travelers offer very little, if any, actual insight into real-life events, the story of Resurrection Mary, though still ambiguous, might actually have some basis in fact. And it might be something altogether bigger. The generally accepted first account of Resurrection Mary was by Jerry Fallis. The veteran ghost hunter and historian Richard Crowe had an opportunity to interview Mr. Fallis in 1989 before he passed away in September of 1992. Excerpts from that interview can be seen in a late 1980s episode of Unsolved Mysteries hosted by Robert Stack. And we're going to get into what Mr. Fallis confirms and relays, but I want to get to the comments real quick because it looks like we've got a lot going on in the chats real quick. Hi, John. How are you? Good to have you here. I am back. I've been gone for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I got a lot done, but oh my goodness, I missed you guys. Yes, on Mama's chicken feet. Oddfather got those for me. Aren't they adorable? Oh, that wasn't a cabinet. No, that wasn't a cabinet. That was Odd Daughter getting into her coffin. That's what that was. And Cirque states, let's see, South. Okay, so it's okay. So it's a abbreviation for Southeastern Arkansas Paranormal Society. Just call me Lynn. Okay, that makes it so much easier, Lynn. Thank you. Um, I lived in Chicago for 14 and a half years and investigated many of the haunted locations there. I now live in. Oh, that's amazing. Um, we might want to talk to you later. We would love to pick your brain if you would like to maybe come on one of our shows to talk about something, because there's a lot of spooky stuff in Chicago. Oh my word. I mean, it's just like, I'm just going to touch on some of it next week. But there is one thing in that area that I think is absolutely Stranger Things crazy. And we're going to get into that. But yeah, Arkansas's got a lot of neat stuff too. It's got a lot of neat stuff too. And then let's see, John says Halloween season, everybody is so busy. Yes, we are extremely busy, busy little bees. All right. Okay. So I told you the origin story as related by Mr. Fallis. Now, again, he was interviewed by Unsolved Mysteries. Mr. Fallis related that one night, and again, a lot of this is just confirmation, that in 1936, he was at the local establishment called the Liberty Grove Hall and Ballroom in the mostly Polish South Side Chicago neighborhood of Bridington Park. He noticed a very pretty young blonde girl in a white dancing dress. He asked her for a dance, and during the evening, she mentioned her name was Mary and that she lived on Damon Avenue. Jerry noticed that she was a very quiet girl and was unusually cold to the touch. He asked her if she would allow him to give her a ride home, and she agreed. Once in the vehicle, she indicated that she would like to take a drive down Archer Avenue. Jerry thought this was a bit odd since Damon Avenue was in the opposite direction. After a short while, Mary suddenly asked Jerry to stop the car. Jerry stopped, and Mary hurriedly exited the vehicle. She crossed Archer Avenue and disappeared into the closed gates of Resurrection Cemetery in suburban Justice, Illinois. And at that time, it was very rural. There was not really anything on that particular section of road. Now, the Liberty Grove Hall and Ballroom no longer exist, but some put the location, like I had said earlier in the origin story, at 47th Street and Mozart Avenue. So even though, like I said, a lot of people refer to Resurrection Mary as an urban legend, it's really starting to look like it's falling more into folklore, which is possibly based on actual events and actual locations. So this particular place that Jerry talks about, it did exist. A lot of those places have either changed names, been torn down and rebuilt, things like that, even though there are still a lot of historic buildings and things in that area. Now, like I said, historical information seems to indicate that an establishment called the Liberty Grove Tavern at 4615 South Mozart existed in 1950, and that in 1923, during the Prohibition era, the name of the establishment was Liberty Grove Amusement Company, which was managed by a gentleman by the name of Albert Paville. Now, in 1919, fire maps show that there was no building in the area of 4615 South Mozart in 1919. The last mention of the Liberty Grove Hall and Ballroom, however, is that of a small Chicago Tribune article that was published December 16th of 1951. The article refers to it as the Liberty Grove Inn, and it was the site of a children's Christmas party put on by the General Hap Arnold Post of the Veterans for Foreign Wars. So based on this information, it does appear that the establishment existed sometime between 1919 and 1965. Being that it appears that the hall and ballroom only occupied one lot, however, it is doubtful that it was actually what one would picture as an elegant ballroom, unlike O. Henry's, which we're going to get into that in a minute. It was more than likely one of many what they call taxi dance halls that were popular all over the city of Chicago during the 1920s and 1930s. A taxi dance hall gave young women and the dance hall owner an opportunity for making money. The establishment would sell dance tickets, usually about 10 cents per ticket, and the woman would earn a commission, usually 5 cents for each ticket they collected by dancing with the patrons. Now let's talk a little bit about who Mary can be. And there's a lot of Marys. There's a whole lot of Marys. But there are two Marys that really stick out and tend to be the closest to actual events and people that could actually represent Resurrection Mary. Now, the first one, and I know I've brought up her name already, is Mary Bogavy. Now, Mary Bogavy was born in 1912, and again, she died in 1934. Mary Bogavy was born in Chicago on April 7th of 1912 to Stefan and Joanne Bogavy, or Kowalski too, Kowalski Bogavy. In 1930, the family was living at 4611 South Damon Avenue in Chicago. So there's Damon Avenue. Mary was the older sister of Joseph and Steve Bogavy. Mary had worked at a factory as a factory worker since she was 18 years old. Now, the Chicago Tribune writes, the night of December 10th of 1934, and this is the write-up about the accident, Mary was in a vehicle driven by John Thole, 25, from Chicago. Also in the vehicle were John Riker, 23, of Park Ridge, and Virginia Rozowski, 22, from Chicago. The vehicle struck an L substructure at Lake Street and Whacker Drive. Mary died of severe head injuries and shock while en route to and I always have a hard time, Innocuous Hospital. I know I pronounced that wrong. Anyway, legend states Mary was buried in an unmarked grave near her mother of the same name in Resurrection Cemetery. Now, there is a Mary Bogavy that is buried and she was born in 1888 and died in 1922, who is buried in Resurrection Cemetery. But this is more than likely a relative to the Mary, if they are any relation at all. Mary was a very common name at that time. Now, according to U.S. Census records, death certificates, and obituaries, Mary Bogavy died in 1922. Who died in 1922, did have a daughter named Mary, but that Mary eventually became Mary Williams, who died in 1987 and is buried a few graves away from her mother. Now, Mary Bogavy's actual parents, Stefan and Joanna, are buried at Resurrection Cemetery, as well as Mary herself, according to the death certificate. However, there is no listing of burial of Mary Bogavy, who died in 1934, in the cemetery's public kiosk, which could be to discourage disrespectfulness. So they're very guarded because they don't want people coming and trying to dig up, or, you know, this particular cemetery was founded and managed, at least for the most part, by the Catholic diocese. So, you know, they don't want a lot of people gawking and things like that. So her death certificate says she's buried there. However, the cemetery's public computer records do not. Now, her parents are buried next to each other, and there is an unmarked grave next to them. Could this be Mary? Now, sadly, the family seemed no stranger to tragedy. After the death of their daughter in 1934, Stefan lost his wife Joanna in 1945 at the age of 62 as a result of heart problems and complicated by pulmonary tuberculosis. So she had tuberculosis. The family was no stranger to tragedy, like I said. Also, when Mary's father committed suicide by hanging himself in the family's garage at the 4611 South Damon Avenue on September 21st, 1951. Definitely a tragic story, but Mary Bogovy, to some people, does not match the description of Resurrection Mary, again, due to the fact that she had short, dark hair and was killed nowhere near Resurrection Cemetery. However, there are certain aspects of the origin stories that do relay some actual information. Now, the second person on the list is an Anne Marja Norkus. And from what I understand, Marja is kind of the Polish name for Mary. Okay. Now, Anna Norkus, and I get this from ghostville.com. And this was an article that was written by Ursula Belinsky. So go check them out. Got a lot of really interesting information. Now, Anna Norkus was born in 1914 and she died in 1927. Now, she was born to Lithuanian parents, August and Anna Simkus Norkus, in Ciro, Illinois, on September 4th of 1914. Norkus was given the name of Ona, which is Lithuanian for Anna. In that era, it was not the custom to christen infants with two names. But after 1918, children were baptized with a Christian name and a historic name to further pride, basically their main home country. So it would have been of like some sort of Polish name as well, or Lithuanian name. As a young girl, Anna was devoted to the Blessed Mother, and it led her to begin using the name Marja or Mary as her middle name. Now, by the time she neared her teenage years, Anna had grown into a vivacious girl. Blonde and slim, she loved to dance, and it was her relentless begging that convinced her father, Augustus Sr., to take her to the dance hall for her 13th birthday. There's a little bit of difference there. Now, on the evening of July 20th of 1927, father and daughter set out from their Chicago home at 5421 South Neva for the famous O. Henry Ballroom, accompanied by Augustus' friend William Wisner and Wisner's date. And the O. Henry Ballroom was actually still there up until the 2000s when it caught on fire and burned down. I think there's just a lot there now, but it was there, and it had been there for a long time. Now, on their drive home at approximately 1:30 a.m., the travelers passed Resurrection Cemetery via Archer Avenue, turning east on 71st Street and then north on Harlem to 67th Street. What Anna's father did not see was the 25-foot railroad cut hole in the roadway at 66th and Harlem Avenue. Anna was crushed under the vehicle. Anna was killed instantly. Officially, Anna Norkus is buried at St. Casimir's Cemetery in Chicago, but that may or may not be the case. A fellow by the name of Al Churas Jr. was a gravedigger who lived across the street from the gates of Resurrection Cemetery. He was also the cousin of one of Anna's friends, Mary Nagode. Mr. Churas stated that during the time frame when Anna died, there were several strikes by gravediggers at various cemeteries. And this was back in the day when you say gravedigger, it was the actual gravediggers, like they hand dug these graves. Now, he remembered that many bodies that were unable to be buried because of the strike would be temporarily interned at Resurrection Cemetery until the strike was over. However, unfortunately, due to poor construction of caskets and earlier embalming techniques, some bodies were unable to be properly identified and may have actually been left in Resurrection Cemetery. So, that leads one to believe they all seem to fit in their own special ways. But knowing, and we're going to get into this next week, knowing just the history of the land, is Mary maybe not a singular who, but more of an embodiment of loss? Or is Mary an active specter entirely operating on her own volition? Or could it actually be the place or something mimicking as something else? And that, my friends, are what we're going to get into next week. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned a little something about Resurrection Mary that you may not have known. But we're going to get into some high strangeness next week. Some high strangeness. Lots of stuff going on in this area. So let's see what's going on in the comments. So John says, sad. It's as if the ghost is trying to get back home. She thinks the cemetery is home. It is very sad. It is very sad. It really is. It is. And that's the reason I kind of added in that last part is Mary more of a, what we see is just that loss, you know what I'm saying? That loss of youth, that loss of living a full life, being in your prime. I mean, that's got to, anytime you have like some sort of, whether it's just residual or like an intelligent haunting, there's always a lot of emotion that surrounds that. And this area too, even before Resurrection Mary kind of made her way on the scene, is no stranger to tragedy. Just a lot of weird stuff. There may be some ley lines in the area, which are energy lines that for you guys that kind of get into the whole ley line things. I find them fascinating. And yes, O. Henry, relation to the O. Henry candy bar. I was listening to a podcast, and I was kind of like about to fall asleep. I want to say that it actually had more to do with the O. Henry candy bar, if I'm not mistaken, had to do with, I want to say, the candy maker's son, whose name was Henry. And the girls were always asking him to do things. And they'd say, oh, Henry, do this. Oh, Henry, do that. And that's kind of where he got it from. Now, I think maybe the dance hall may have taken that and used it as a name. I don't really know. I can look into it. But I'm thinking that's kind of how it goes. And Roots Bleed Red says, Lynn, I think if you're listening, I think my messages aren't posting. Feel free to message us on Facebook on Roots Bleed Red or Psycho Bunny Death Cult. Yes, please get in touch with us. I know that we had some things to talk about with you guys too. And I also would love to pick some people's brains about some ghosties and stuff too. So kind of a side note on that. But yeah, get in touch with us. We'd love to talk to you. And I know that we had talked about some other things as well. So, and also guys, do not forget, 2 more days to get your submissions in for the costume contest. Okay. And we try to do this as fair as we can to keep people from submitting either somebody else in costume that's not really them, and I know nobody here would cheat, but just to keep it fair, when you submit your picture for the costume contest, just it can be just a handwritten post-it or something in one of your pictures that says PBDC entry, and be holding it in at least one of your pictures. You can submit up to 3 pictures of your contest, and you can submit once per costume. So you can do multiple costumes if you want, but we've got to have in at least one picture of that costume you holding up something that verifies that that is you in that costume. And that's just to keep it fair so that we don't have, I don't know. It's just to keep it fair. So go and do that. You got 2 more days. We've got some fabulous prizes we're going to give away. And then we're going to be putting all the submissions up on the website next week for people to vote on. So you guys will be doing the voting. We won't have anything to do with it. It'll be all you guys doing the voting. So that'll be a lot of fun. And then we'll pick the winner from that and announce that. And they'll get a fabulous prizes and some merch and stuff like that. So yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. So go do that. Homework, go do that. Go submit your pictures for the costume contest. And you do have to be 18 years of older, and you do have to be a U.S. continental resident. So, because shipping is just so expensive now. So let's see what's going on real quick, and then I'm going to say pleasant nightmares, guys. All right. And then Nadine says, Gravediggers, monster truck voice. And when I think of gravediggers, I always think of the two gravediggers, even though I know one of them, I think, used a backhoe in Stephen King's Salem's Lot. That when I think of gravediggers, that's what I always think of. I don't know why. All right. Okay, guys. Well, I hope you have a great rest of the week. Stay tuned for other content artists. I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, that Sharon Ness, our resident in-house witch, will be doing her readings tomorrow night. So catch her. She does tarot, rune, and pendulum. She's just a fabulous person, and I really enjoy her readings and things like that. So go get yourself a free reading. And I do believe she comes on at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, if I'm not mistaken. Then Roots Bleed Red this coming up Friday. And then, of course, Eating Sundays. And Mikey has changed his days to Tuesdays. So we will now see him at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time on Tuesdays for Out of the Ordinary. So we're super excited about that. So I hope you guys have a great rest of the week and pleasant nightmares, everybody. Bye.
I don't know, set the world higher. I don't know, in my heart,
Hi everybody, Delphine here. Just wanted to make an announcement. We are going to be starting a costume contest on October 1st. Submissions will be accepted from October 1st to October 7th. And the contest itself will be taking place between the 8th and the 21st, with the winner being announced on October 22nd. There is a prize. It is a great prize. There's going to be some Psycho Bunny swag, and maybe from some of our other content artists as well, and tons of Halloween goodies, because we all know that's our favorite time of the year, right? All submissions and voting will take place on psychobunnydc.com. And let's bring this up here. Here's a little bit more information for you. And remember, this will be taking place on psychobunnydc.com. I hope to see you guys there. Thank you for joining me for this really quick announcement. Bye.
Hey! It's me, Nix, the Psycho Mantis, coming to you live from Psycho Mantium 13. Join us here throughout the week for all things in audio, visual, and literary content. You can also find us on the World Wide Web at psychomantium13.com. Join Psychomantium 13 and enter the weird.